Well, let's bring in Spencer Critchley now. He's a Democratic Party strategist and joins us from Monterey in California. Good to have you back with us, Spencer. But firstly, can I get your initial thoughts to this latest indictment from authorities in Georgia?
My initial thought is that it's, first of all, crucially important to defend the rule of law if you want to preserve a democracy. Democracy is nothing without the core institutions and norms like the rule of law. But it's only part of the challenge of saving democracy. And what's really going to be required here in the United States is a convincing electoral defeat for Trump and everybody like him, should he be the candidate as looks likely. Because beyond the legal questions here is the moral question. In a liberal democracy, you want to avoid making political decisions into moral ones. But when you're electing people or potentially electing people who are trying to destroy democracy, it becomes a moral choice. And I think that that's the most important lesson to take from all of these legal cases. They're crucially important. We must uphold the rule of law. But ultimately, the United States and any other country that's suffering from democratic backsliding has to reckon with the moral issue.
And clearly, as we pore over the details of this sweeping indictment that authorities in Georgia have issued, the prosecutors there believe they have a strong case against Trump and his 18 associates. But what are your thoughts? Do you believe there is a strong case in terms of this latest indictment?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I think that what makes these cases so strong uh, is that you don't really have to be a lawyer to witness with your own eyes what you've been watching happen or hearing with your own ears. For example, the notorious phone call in Georgia to Mr. Raffensperger, the Secretary of State in Georgia, where Trump is mobster style saying, look, I just need you to find me 11,780 votes. Now, of course, he claims that's because I honestly believed that I had won the election. But obviously, that's not true. That argument amounts to he gets to have an election overthrown just because he wants it to be overthrown. He chooses to believe whatever fantasy he wants to believe to serve his own interests. As others have pointed out, that's like me saying, I believe the bank owes me $1 million, and I sincerely believe that, therefore I'm justified in robbing the bank.
As far as we know, if Trump is found guilty in any of these indictments, he could still technically become president. From what I gather, there isn't a provision in the US Constitution that bars anyone that's being criminally investigated or indeed found guilty of any criminal charges from taking office. But what damage would that do if Trump is found guilty and he wins the election?
Well, this gets to the moral question I was talking about. If you believe in democracy, obviously that should be unthinkable. And in fact, apparently it was unthinkable. If you go back to the founding of the country and the Federalist Papers, the famous series of articles written by Alexander Hamilton and James Madison and others, and John Jay, I believe, if I'm remembering right. Hamilton explicitly describes in one of the Federalist Papers the expectation that, of course, only the people of the highest character would ever be nominated for senior office in the United States. And they assumed from their contacts that that was a self-evident truth. Nobody could have imagined back then that we'd be in a position now where the argument of the Republican Party and Trump supporters generally is basically, if he can get away with it, it's okay. Character doesn't matter whatsoever. Even if he were somehow to be acquitted of the many, many felony charges he's facing, it's obvious he's unfit for office, and that's the issue that must be wrestled with above all here.
And Spencer, as we've seen from the three other indictments that have been leveled against Donald Trump, all they've done really is to further embolden Donald Trump's base. He is now by far the prohibitive favorite, if opinion polls are to be believed, in terms of clinching the Republican presidential nomination ahead of next year's election. Do you believe that this latest indictment will only add to his popularity among his supporters?
Yes, absolutely, because this is ultimately a rejection of liberal democracy on the part of Trump supporters. Many of them, of course, are not thinking about it in precisely those terms, but that's what it amounts to. And this is what we see in other countries that are facing assaults on the basic institutions of democracy, is a rejection of liberal democracy by people who essentially want to convert a country like the United States, a liberal democracy, into an ethnic nationalist state in which there's some kind of imaginary real American, as if there's an ethnic tribe of Americans, and authoritarianism is justified to serve the interests of that ethnic tribe. Now, that's explicitly anti-American based on the founding of the nation as a civic nation, meaning one founded on ideas, not on any particular ethnic identity. That is the real struggle here, and that's the struggle that's being faced elsewhere with an upsurge of ethnic nationalism, which, most of us overly complacent liberals, small L liberals, people who believe in liberalism, whether they're on the left or the right, did not appreciate until it happened that there would be a backlash against what looked like the triumph of liberal democracy in the 1990s, and a backlash and a resurgence of ethnic nationalism, which everybody thought had been left behind in the 19th, left behind, I would say, after World War II, Nazi Germany, fascist Italy being the absolute nadir in the worst possible horror of where ethnic nationalism leads.
Well, given that Donald Trump is still the favorite to win the Republican presidential nomination, do you believe that Joe Biden is the best person to go up against him at the election next year?
Yes. Now, of course, behind that question, there's the concern about President Biden's age, which I think everybody has to acknowledge is a legitimate concern. He's going to be the oldest candidate for re-election in our history. And anybody who's been in a stressful job, let alone what I can only imagine to be the stress involved in being the president of the United States, is amazed that he can do it as I think, exceptionally well as he's doing it now at the age he's at now. And I'm sure that he himself is thinking if he feels that age is becoming an issue for him, he will not run again. But obviously he cannot say that and turn himself into an instant lame duck. But I would say based on his record so far, he is an excellent candidate. This message, it's hard to get this message through past the storm of misinformation that we're dealing with in contemporary media. But Joe Biden has one of the most successful first terms in modern American history. You have to go back to Lyndon Johnson to find something comparable, and Lyndon Johnson had overwhelming majorities in his favor in the Congress. Biden is dealing with a much more difficult environment, and he's had enormous accomplishments both domestically and internationally.
Okay, Spencer Critchley, we will have to leave it there, but it's always good to get your analysis. Thanks once again for joining us.